Massive shock in Formula One. Lewis Hamilton terminates his Ferrari contract over clause violations and announces his immediate move to Red Bull, replacing Yuki Tsunoda. If you want to find out what contract breaches led to this dramatic split and what pushed Hamilton to leave Ferrari, stay with us until the end. This video is made for you. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. Lewis Hamilton's seismic shift to Red Bull Racing wasn't a whim, a sudden betrayal or a publicity stunt. It was a deeply personal decision forged in silence, shadowed by disappointment, sharpened by humiliation, and powered by a vision that went beyond points, trophies, and podiums. It began in boardrooms, behind closed doors, where handshakes turned into handcuffs and promises into prison walls. It grew in the whispers exchanged in the corners of paddocks, in the unspoken glances during engineering briefings, in the constant tug-of-war between heritage and progress. For over a year, Hamilton existed not as a revered icon but as a misunderstood presence inside Ferrari's labyrinth of internal politics, historic baggage, and conflicting ambitions. He had arrived in Italy with the weight of expectation and the fire of ambition. His goal wasn't merely to win, it was to rebuild, to uplift, to inject fresh blood into a legacy that had fossilized under the immense shadow of its past. Ferrari, however, clung desperately to its mythos. The corridors of Maranello felt like temples, not laboratories. Engineers clutched their methods with religious fervor. Attempts to modernize telemetry interpretation, streamline aerodynamic development processes, and reorient strategic priorities were seen not as improvements but as intrusions. His desire to integrate trusted minds from Mercedes was politely deflected. His strategy meetings were filled with silent resistance, masked in civility but soaked in opposition. In public, it all looked harmonious. The red overalls, the choreographed smiles, the ceremonial toasts to legacy. But behind the curtain, the fracture lines widened. In internal meetings, Hamilton's suggestions were acknowledged with nods and then left to die in dusty folders. His feedback on setup, particularly on mid-corner grip and torque balance, was repeatedly deprioritized. When he reviewed simulator output and saw that changes aligned almost exclusively with Leclerc's handling preferences, the betrayal sank deep into his bones. It wasn't personal, it was structural. He wasn't being ignored because they disliked him. He was being overlooked because they never planned to let him lead. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. Zandvoort became the moment that crystallized his quiet rebellion. Left stranded on the wrong tire compound during a critical switch window, he watched helplessly as competitors overtook him, not because he lacked skill, but because he was abandoned in real time. When he sat with the strategy unit afterward, his voice never rose, but each word hit like thunder. This isn't confusion. This is erosion. One decision at a time. There was no shouting. No drama. Just clarity that pierced through every layer of institutional inertia. From that moment forward, Hamilton began to disengage, not from racing, but from the illusion that Ferrari would ever truly be his team. As this emotional and professional disintegration unfolded, Christian Horner moved quietly in the background like a chess grandmaster several moves ahead. He recognized that even dynasties with the most dominant cars needed new stories to stay alive. In Hamilton, he didn't just see a champion, he saw a visionary, a force, a voice that could shift the axis of power in Formula One. Horner's first signals were indirect. A conversation sparked by a shared friend during a yacht event in the Côte d'Azur. A message relayed through a trainer. A comment seeded in a podcast interview. Slowly, carefully, trust was extended without expectation. Then, the walls dropped. An off-the-grid meeting arranged near Lake Como. No managers. No cameras. No protocols. Just Hamilton, Horner, and a growing understanding between two individuals who knew how it felt to be both revered and doubted. Hamilton poured out his frustrations, not as complaints, but as truths. "I'm boxed in," he admitted. "Respected in interviews. Ignored in meetings." Horner, ever the strategist, didn't pitch, didn't sell. He offered one sentence that echoed with gravity: "You don't belong in a museum. You belong in a command center." The weeks that followed were a masterclass in secrecy, ambition, and execution. Red Bull's legal team operated under layers of encryption, using burner devices and decentralized communication tools. Code-name-labeled documents were exchanged only in person. Hamilton's role wasn't pitched as a driver upgrade, it was a cultural transformation. A seat not just in the RB21 cockpit, but at the long-term innovation table. He was offered decision-making power in Red Bull's push into electric motorsport, influence in the junior academy's reshaping, direct collaboration with sustainability directors to make the team more than just fast, make it future-proof. This wasn't a contract. It was a manifesto with carbon fiber edges. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. Even within Red Bull, only a handful of people were privy to the full scope. Engineers whispered in half-sentences, unsure if the rumors were real. Verstappen's inner circle remained blissfully unaware until the final signatures were dry. When Newey was finally brought in, he wasn't shocked, he was intrigued. "If we're rewriting the future," he said with a grin, "why not use the most experienced pen?" Hamilton had gone from sidelined advisor to central architect. And he wasn't there to co-drive. He was there to co-lead. The backlash from the outside world was instant and deafening. Italian media declared it a betrayal. British commentators called it strategic suicide. Ferrari insiders leaked conflicting narratives. Leclerc, blindsided, gave vague responses that hid disbelief behind diplomacy. Fans split violently, some mourning what could have been, others ecstatic about what might now become. But Hamilton didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He had been burned before, publicly and privately, and he no longer sought validation from those who hadn't sat in his cockpit, hadn't reviewed his data sheets, hadn't seen the extent of his silencing. He wasn't joining Red Bull to settle scores. He was there to redefine his legacy, not as the man who almost revived Ferrari, but as the force who reshaped the final chapter of the hybrid era and built the foundations of the next one. In the minds of many, this move was unimaginable. But in Hamilton's world, imagination had always been his fuel. He wasn't running away from the past. He was running toward the future, and he was done asking for permission. The second the faintest trace of the rumor made its way to Mercedes headquarters, it didn't come like thunder, it came like a whisper, the kind that crawls under your skin. Toto Wolff didn't wait for confirmation. He didn't need to. His instinct, refined by years in the high-stakes corridors of Formula One, told him something seismic was coming. Lewis Hamilton's departure had always felt off, not wrong in strategy, but wrong in the soul. The public believed it had been mutual, respectful, the end of an era handled with class. But Toto knew better. Deep inside, he buried questions he didn't want to face, and now they were clawing their way back to the surface. Why hadn't they honored him properly? Why had it all ended with a press release instead of a legacy? He couldn't escape it anymore. That nagging feeling wasn't going away. So he reached out, not to a manager, not to an agent, but to Lewis himself. A personal call, short, direct. They agreed to meet far from the glare of cameras, in a place where legends weren't legends, just men trying to understand what went wrong. Vienna, cold and quiet in winter, became the backdrop to a confrontation that had been postponed far too long. Toto arrived early. He always did. But this time, he wasn't in control. When Lewis entered the room, it wasn't just the presence of a seven-time world champion. It was the presence of someone who had been deeply hurt and had buried that pain under layers of silence. They sat across from each other, no PR handlers, no agenda, no filters. Just years of memories, victories, scars, and silence between them. Toto broke it first. "I made mistakes," he began, voice low, steady, but weighed down by something that sounded dangerously close to regret. "We were looking ahead so fast, we forgot to look around. We acted like you were already part of the past, when you were still capable of reshaping the future." He paused, trying to find the right words, as if any could undo what had been done. "You were never just a symbol for us. You were the heartbeat." Lewis didn't rush to respond. He let the silence stretch, and when he finally spoke, it wasn't loud, it was sharp. "You said all the right things in public," he said. "But in private? You disappeared." After the races, the silence in the debriefs, the way my name started getting smaller in the presentations, the way the praise slowly shifted away, even when I was still delivering. "You wanted Russell to be the next chapter. That's fine. But you didn't close mine." He leaned back slightly, eyes fixed on Wolff. "There was a night. Dinner with the team. One of your new guys called George the senior driver. No one said anything. I didn't either. I smiled. But inside, I was already gone." His voice didn't shake, but there was something deeply personal in it. You didn't lose me when I signed with someone else. You lost me when you stopped seeing me. Toto tried to fix it. Not with words this time, with actions. He laid it all out. The seat was his again, unrestricted. A long-term deal. Ownership in the Formula E division. Total freedom to pick his crew, lead his own development program, influence the future of the brand itself. It wasn't just an offer, it was a kingdom. But Hamilton didn't even blink. It's not about the money, he said. It's not even about control. It's about dignity. And you don't get to retroactively give that back. And so the world turned, unaware that a different storm had already been set in motion. The moment Red Bull Racing released the statement confirming Lewis Hamilton as their new driver, it didn't just break the internet, it broke the paddock. It shattered assumptions. It shook the very structure of power in Formula One. This wasn't a signing. It was a revolution disguised as a headline. Verstappen was pulled into a private meeting immediately, before the media frenzy could reach his ears through a second-hand source. In a tightly secured conference room, surrounded by Helmut Marko and Christian Horner, Max listened with arms crossed and his jaw clenched. He didn't erupt, but the temperature dropped instantly. "This isn't just about car performance," he said, voice calm but razor-edged. "This changes everything. Why now? What message are you sending?" Marko tried to appeal to logic. He spoke about market potential, brand expansion, Hamilton's unparalleled experience. Horner attempted reassurance, saying the hierarchy wouldn't shift, that Max was still the core of the team's identity. But Max had heard this kind of language before, in different forms. He knew when a storm was coming, and he could feel it now. This wasn't just about sharing a garage, it was about sharing oxygen with someone who didn't take space. He commanded it. Verstappen left the meeting without slamming a door or raising his voice. But what followed behind closed doors was far more telling than any press release. He reached out to his father, Jos, not for advice but for clarity. The two had their differences, but when it came to career instinct, Max always trusted Jos. And Jos didn't mince words. "You built an empire," he told his son. "They just invited a king." The conversations that followed within Verstappen's inner circle became more than whispers. They were strategic evaluations. Legal clauses were revisited. Long-standing assumptions were questioned. For the first time, serious talk emerged about options beyond Red Bull. Projects that once seemed distant, Audi's full entry plans, potential Ferrari restructures, even early-stage discussions with Mercedes about an eventual megadeal, they were no longer fantasy. Max wasn't reacting emotionally. He was recalibrating. The paddock shifted around him. Journalists watched for signs, teams scrambled to adapt, and the rest of the grid suddenly saw the sport with new eyes. This wasn't just Hamilton switching teams. It was the collision of eras, styles, and philosophies. It was Hamilton walking into the lion's den not as prey, but as a lion himself. And Verstappen, for all his dominance, suddenly found himself part of a story he didn't write. Meanwhile, Hamilton said nothing. He didn't need to. Every step he took through the paddock, every glance, every moment of silence carried more impact than 1,000 interviews. Because this wasn't about redemption. It was about taking back control of a narrative that others had tried to finish without him. Sponsors didn't just react, they went into overdrive, executing massive pivots in strategy that sent shockwaves through marketing departments across industries. Puma, already closely tied to Lewis Hamilton, saw the opportunity of a lifetime and moved at breakneck speed to craft a never-before-seen campaign. It wasn't just a merchandise expansion, it was a rebranding revolution. Executives began drafting plans to introduce a new fashion-forward capsule line that merged Hamilton's urban luxury style with Red Bull's audacious energy, aiming to dominate both streetwear and sportswear markets. Collaborations with global artists, influencers, and designers were rapidly greenlit, while internal forecasts predicted historic quarterly growth. At the same time, Tag Heuer, facing an unexpected brand crossroads, immediately launched an emergency reassessment of its ambassador program. Their entire marketing framework had leaned heavily on Verstappen's image, precise, aggressive, and unrelenting. Now, with Hamilton in the mix, the company faced a dilemma: shift focus, expand representation, or risk irrelevance in the new narrative. High-level executives debated strategy into the night, some pushing for a generational theme to contrast the two drivers, while others proposed unique timepiece releases symbolizing each champion's legacy. Meanwhile, Media chaos ignited. Netflix producers, never ones to shy away from drama, pushed harder than ever before. The studio doubled its budget for the upcoming season of Drive to Survive, and producers demanded unrestricted access to both drivers' inner circles. Contracts were rewritten, NDAs redrafted, and additional film crews dispatched to follow not only the race weekends but also the private lives, gym routines, and off-track interactions of the two mega-personalities. This was no longer just a documentary. It was shaping up to be the most explosive narrative in motorsport history. One insider described the project as part Greek tragedy, part modern warfare. Traditional broadcasters scrambled in panic. Sky Sports canceled pre-recorded promotional content and began reshooting entire segments to align with the seismic shift. ESPN executives pulled all-night sessions revamping their editorial calendar, allocating prime-time slots for coverage that now promised to be pure television gold. Studio anchors received revised scripts emphasizing the conflict potential, and producers started developing special segments to explore the psychological toll on both sides. Streaming platforms entered bidding wars for exclusive interview rights, and podcasts surged with guests analyzing every facial twitch, every line of body language, every inferred grudge. Online, the digital storm surged. Platforms like X, TikTok, and YouTube erupted in a flood of speculative content. Hashtags dominated global trends, with hashtag PowerStruggleF1, hashtag Hamilton vs Verstappen 2025, and hashtag Red Bull Revolution drawing millions of posts within hours. Fan communities turned into investigative units, dissecting radio comms, old interviews, and even sponsor interactions to find any clue about how this dynamic might unfold. Fan-made trailers, memes, deep dive breakdowns, and fancams flooded every corner of the internet. Subreddits ballooned with theories so intricate they bordered on espionage fiction. One user traced airport arrivals to speculate on clandestine meetings between engineers and driver camps. TikTok creators faked WhatsApp message leaks for clout, while Instagram flooded with AI-generated images of podium confrontations that hadn't even happened yet. Beneath the media frenzy, inside Red Bull Racing's fortress-like headquarters, the real drama unfolded in quiet chaos. What had been a fortress of dominance and stability quickly transformed into a pressure cooker of impossible demands and conflicting ideologies. Engineers, used to catering exclusively to Verstappen's aggressive driving style and deeply personalized setup, were suddenly tasked with recalibrating everything. Hamilton's distinct preferences required tangible changes, altered seat positioning, different feedback dynamics, and an entirely new communication protocol with his race engineer. The simulator team was stretched thin, managing two vastly different developmental paths. Coders faced a technical minefield, updating data inputs to reflect real-time feedback from both champions without letting one invalidate the progress of the other. Calibration tools that had functioned seamlessly for years now displayed anomalies as each driver pushed the car in diametrically opposed ways. Debates broke out between engineering departments, some favoring legacy systems built for Verstappen, others advocating for new frameworks tailored to Hamilton's finesse and adaptability. And the conflict wasn't just mechanical, it was psychological. Within the team, factions began forming, not out of malice, but out of loyalty. Verstappen's core group, having built a dynasty with him, viewed Hamilton's arrival as a threat to the culture they had shaped. On the other hand, new hires and younger staffers saw Hamilton as a visionary, a global icon whose influence could elevate the team beyond the racetrack. Casual hallway conversations turned tense. Glances exchanged during debriefs spoke volumes. Some engineers hesitated to ask questions in meetings, unsure which camp their thoughts might offend. Outside the garage, even the paddock's creature comforts reflected the growing divide. Red Bull's hospitality zone, once a seamless blend of high-performance branding and elite charm, had to be reconstructed to accommodate two different ecosystems. Hamilton's entourage required a separate environment, complete with dedicated wellness spaces, individualized catering, and a revamped PR corridor tailored for his commitments and image management. The duality extended to scheduling as well. Press briefings were separated to avoid awkward interactions. Sponsor events were carefully negotiated to ensure neither driver appeared to be given preferential treatment. Tension simmered with every decision. Verstappen's father was heard making veiled comments about outsiders disrupting chemistry, while Hamilton's representatives quietly reminded the team of their contractual influence and brand value. At the center of this emotional storm stood Christian Horner, juggling a circus of egos, expectations, and existential risks. His calendar became a battlefield. morning meetings with technical leads, afternoon crisis calls with sponsors, and evening sessions managing media fallout. He issued internal memos urging cohesion, spoke in interviews about a team stronger with both champions, but behind closed doors, reality told a different story. Some described him as a chess player running out of pieces. Others likened him to a tightrope walker, one gust of wind away from collapse. Privately, Horner admitted to a confidant, "We're playing with lightning in both hands." Despite the turmoil, the world watched, entranced. Every pre-race stare-down, every strategically ambiguous radio call, every slight twitch of the steering wheel carried global significance. F1 had never seen a story quite like this. Two legends forced to share space, glory, ambition, and a single path to victory. There was no escape. The stakes had transcended championship points. This wasn't about driving anymore. It was about identity, legacy, and an unstoppable collision course written into the very DNA of the season. No scriptwriter could have penned it better. And as the engines roared toward the opening round, one truth stood above all. No one, not the fans, not the teams, not even the drivers themselves, could predict what would happen next. Hamilton, in the face of an avalanche of scrutiny and noise, displayed a stillness that unsettled even his most seasoned rivals. While pundits dissected every nuance of his career shift, while fans either mourned his departure from Mercedes or celebrated his daring leap into the unknown, he remained untouched by the emotional storm swirling around him. He wasn't reacting, he was recalibrating. Away from the spotlight, away from the microphones, he began to reconstruct himself in a setting that no one predicted. He shifted his base of operations to the highlands of Austria, choosing an environment both physically demanding and symbolically strategic. Mountains became his walls, altitude his new companion. He wasn't hiding. He was sharpening. Instead of clinging to old methods, he immersed himself in the unfamiliar. Red Bull's training infrastructure, once perceived as a fortress exclusively shaped around Verstappen's dominance, began to open up to him, not because they were eager to welcome an outsider, but because Hamilton's relentless pursuit of understanding left them no choice. He didn't come with ego. He came with questions. He came with notebooks full of observations, a mind wide open, and a willingness to become a student again. The coaches were stunned. They had expected defiance, arrogance, maybe even resistance. But what they encountered was obsession. Controlled, precise, methodical obsession. He asked them about micromuscle feedback, oxygen processing efficiency under sustained G-forces, synaptic fatigue during high-speed corrections. These weren't ordinary inquiries. They were the thoughts of a man preparing to dismantle limits. He then made a request that spread through the team like a dropped match in a dry forest. He wanted access to Verstappen's archived telemetry data, especially the segments captured during torrential races, slippery circuits, and high-pressure moments. The exact inputs Max applied in chaos. The timing of every lift, every brake modulation, every unorthodox racing line he carved in the wet. Hamilton didn't want to copy. He wanted to decode. To dissect the essence of his rival's instincts and fuse it with his own. To some within the team, it felt like sacrilege. To others, it was exhilarating. One engineer said it felt like watching someone attempt to translate fire into language. But Hamilton was undeterred. "I need to know it all," he reportedly declared in a closed-door debrief, his voice quiet but absolute. "I didn't come to coexist. I came to dominate." That phrase wasn't leaked. It escaped, like thunder slipping through a crack in the clouds. Within hours, it was viral. Within days, it was on posters, shouted by fans, whispered by skeptics. But for Hamilton, it was never meant for the outside world. It was a promise he made to himself, in solitude, in silence, in preparation. This wasn't a man drifting into the twilight of his career. This was someone refusing to settle, refusing to fade. He didn't want ceremony. He didn't need nostalgia. He wanted challenge, resistance, opposition. And he sought it at the only place where the throne remained occupied, Red Bull. The move wasn't symbolic, it was surgical. It wasn't emotional, it was calculated. No one had ever navigated the elite spectrum of McLaren, Mercedes, Ferrari, and Red Bull. No one had infiltrated every bastion of Formula One royalty. Until now. Each team had demanded different things of him. McLaren molded his hunger. Mercedes refined his legacy. Ferrari tested his resolve. And now, Red Bull was set to awaken something even deeper, a side of Hamilton that didn't want to be remembered, but redefined. He wasn't building a legacy. He was rewriting the definition of one. In the media, confusion turned to obsession. Was this an act of betrayal? Was it revenge? A swan song? A power move? Or was it perhaps something more terrifying? Was it the final evolution of a man who had already conquered everything and yet was still unsatisfied? Articles tried to capture it. Pundits tripped over metaphors. But no narrative fully grasped what was happening. Inside Red Bull, subtle tremors began to form. Verstappen remained outwardly relaxed, but internally, things were shifting. The unspoken equilibrium of the team was tilting. Staff who once only had one voice to follow were now quietly listening to another. Hamilton didn't demand authority. He exuded presence. He didn't challenge openly. He shifted perspectives simply by existing in the room. He stayed long hours after sessions ended, sitting with data engineers, scribbling thoughts in his own shorthand code, asking questions that no one had asked before. He wasn't looking for flaws in Max. He was hunting for gaps in the universe, cracks in the formula, asymmetries in perfection. He was dismantling greatness to build a version of himself no one had ever seen. And those watching knew, something rare was unfolding. In one of those late-night sessions, in the faint hum of the simulator chamber, where only the most devoted remained, a veteran mechanic who had served through eras of champions, watched the screen as Hamilton reviewed lap after lap after lap, not out of anxiety, but out of pure, unbreakable curiosity. The mechanic who had once watched Vettel's brilliance bloom, Ricciardo's flare shine, and Verstappen's raw power harden into dominance, finally looked up and murmured as if speaking to the air itself, "He's not here to play a role in the legend. He's here to claim the final word."